Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining us. My name is Alisa. I'm one of the co-founders, let's say, of the AirTeam community. We like to call it co-founding members because we're a community. And we have Robert here. Robert is one of the instructors at AirTeam Career Bootcamp. And just a small reminder, what do we do here? We're helping people, professionals from different spheres, from marketing, from design, from web development, who want to improve their skills, their language skills, their soft skills, and who also looking for jobs in the United States. And we are helping this kind of people with career consultations and with language courses, but also with the 5-week career bootcamp. This is our main product, and we will talk about it a bit later. And we have Robert here. Robert is the California native, and he's also a TEFL certified English instructor and a career coach. And Robert, can you tell us more about yourself, about your background, and how did you get where you are?
Yeah, certainly. Well, like you said, I'm originally from California in the US, but I've actually lived all over the United States, in California, Kentucky, Colorado, New York, Washington, DC. So I've kind of lived everywhere. Now I actually travel full time, and I've been doing that for about 6 years now. And about 6 years ago, I got a certification to teach English as a second language, which is what I've been doing for the last few years. And about 4 years ago, I started focusing exclusively on clients who want to work in English-speaking environments. So everyone I work with speaks English as a second language, and all of them are looking for jobs in the United States or perhaps England, or in an environment where they need to use English. Perhaps they're working from their home country remotely, but they still have to communicate in English. So I specialize in helping people find jobs and prepare for interviews in English-speaking environments.
And one of the most popular questions that we get is, what level of English do you need to actually work in the US? Because that's a concern for most of the people. And it's also a concern for them to enter the bootcamp because they're not sure if their level is enough. So can you talk about it?
Absolutely. This is kind of the first question everyone wants to know. And unfortunately, it's a very tricky question, right? Because it depends on the industry and the role that you're looking at. So it can be very different for different people. Many of the clients I work with and many of the people we've helped in our first session of the boot camp work in tech. So in tech, for example, it depends on the role you're applying for. If you're an independent developer who's doing a lot of work on your own, or if you want to be some sort of team leader or manager. If you want to be any sort of team leader or manager, obviously your English skills and your communication skills in general need to be quite a bit higher than if you're just an individual contributor. So if you're somebody who's working a lot on your own, maybe you're a front-end developer, back-end developer, and you're an individual contributor, you don't need to worry as much about your English. I think you can get away with, like a low-level intermediate, maybe like a B1 level of English. Obviously, you still need to prepare for your interview and you need to be able to pass an interview in English, but your speaking skills in particular will be less important than somebody who wants to be in a leadership role, somebody who's going to be communicating with a team regularly. So if you want to be a manager or a team leader, you're going to be looking for B2 plus, okay? And that's somebody who's quite comfortable in conversation and somebody who has no problem reading and writing in English. So there's obviously 4 different main skills when it comes to your English. We have speaking, listening, reading, and writing. If you're an individual contributor, as long as you have pretty good reading and writing skills and you're able to communicate a little bit, I think you're okay. But if you're somebody who wants to be a manager or team leader, you really need to be confident and comfortable giving presentations, talking to large groups. So there we're looking for somebody at like a C1 level. Now, if you're somebody in a totally different industry like marketing, your communication skills might be even more important, right? Because you're delivering messages to customers in English. So if you want to be working in a high-level position in marketing, you certainly need to be closer to the fluent spectrum. So I would say C1 plus for those types of jobs. But the nice thing to remember is that, when you go into an interview, you can always talk about working on your English and trying to reach the next level. When people we're working with are in interviews, they're all obviously speaking English as a second language, and the interviewers are going to know that. So as long as you communicate that you're actively working on your English skills and you know it's something you need to improve, you leave that option open for the interviewer to understand that even if your English is at an intermediate level now, you're working towards a higher or more advanced level.
I think we already have some questions. I think, read them because they're,
sure.
They're about the same topic.
Sure.
Catherine is asking, do we need the IELTS or TOEFL certificate to get a job?
So totally depends on the position, but in most cases, I would say no. If you're applying for a job in academics, it's possible that they'll want one of these certificates, or they'll ask you to pass a language test before even applying for the job. But in most cases, in most companies across the US, they're not going to require one of these certifications. And the good news is that if they do, they should make this very clear within the job description so that you understand these requirements even before you apply for a position.
Yeah, I copy that. And do you think they're paying attention to accent? Like, do you really need to perfect your accent before getting into interviewing process?
I think accent and pronunciation is much less important than being able to communicate effectively. So having a wide range of vocabulary and a pretty solid understanding of grammar is much more important than trying to reduce your accent, right? Accents are more important for maybe actors or somebody who's going to be being recorded all the time. But for most positions, people aren't going to mind if you have a strong accent or not, as long as you can clearly communicate your ideas. And one thing I should mention is that our bootcamp is actually separated based on your English comprehension and your understanding and level. So even if you have sort of a beginner level English and you're not quite sure if you're ready to sign up for an English speaking bootcamp, we cater to all levels of English. So I don't want anyone to be turned off by their English skills. We welcome everybody, whether you're just learning English or you're completely fluent and totally comfortable speaking English.
Yeah, I think it's also important to mention the individual English assessment that we do. So in the beginning of the course, you get the assessment of your English level, and then we can give you recommendations of how to improve it as well. And talking about this, what are the most effective methods and tools that you know for adults to learn English?
Yeah, so like I mentioned before, I've been teaching English for a long time now, and I can say with full confidence that the best way to learn English is simply by practicing, right? The more you can speak with a competent speaker, the better your skills are going to get much faster. So the nice thing about our bootcamp is it gives you a chance to practice speaking, listening, reading, and writing. But I think speaking and forcing yourself to speak is the most important component of that, right? Speaking requires that you listen, and the more often you're doing both of these things, the better your English is going to get much quicker, right? I think the other thing is trying to practice with a native speaker, or at least somebody who's not going to give you bad habits. Sometimes I find people are communicating with very similar level speakers, and sometimes these bad habits can become more and more ingrained if you're hearing them from somebody else and you're not understanding your mistakes. So if you can find a teacher or a native speaker who can help you understand your mistakes and help you improve those key things, that's the quickest way for you to get better. I would also encourage people to study in small chunks very regularly, rather than trying to cram all your studying or practice into just one day or maybe a couple hours each week. I work with a lot of different clients, and I find the ones who make the most progress are the ones who are practicing regularly, right? Even if it's just 30 minutes a day, 3 or 4 times a week, it's much better than just doing 1 hour once a week or 5 hours once a month, okay? Other things you can do that are helpful, obviously, are like watching movies and TV shows in English. The more exposure you have to English, the more you're going to improve quicker. There's obviously lots of apps and kind of games that you can do to kind of help you motivate to study each day. Even if you're spending 10 or 15 minutes on these apps, I think it really makes a difference. Another trick that a lot of my clients have used is to change their phone settings into English. We're all on our phones all the time. And if you're looking at your phone and everything's in English, it might be kind of frustrating or difficult at first, but that repeated exposure is going to make a big difference for you in a short amount of time. So practice your speaking as much as possible. Use these apps and podcasts and things like that when you can't actually interact with another person. Watch movies and TV shows and change your phone settings to English. Those would be kind of my main tips to see progress as quick as possible. Obviously, if you can participate in our bootcamp or another learning experience in English, you're forcing yourself to practice. And I think that's a great way to see progress very quickly.
And you mentioned some apps. Can you have some examples? Like, can you give some examples of these apps, like Duolingo?
Yeah. Sure. So there's big names like Duolingo or Elsa or Babbel, which are all great options. They all have free versions and then ask you to pay for kind of the more advanced or upgraded features. But like I said, even if you're spending 5 or 10 minutes on one of these apps every day, I think you'll notice an improvement in just a matter of a couple weeks. So I would highly recommend that you check some of these out. There's great podcasts like All Ears English that you can check out. They have very short episodes. You can also listen to the news, for example, by podcast. You can listen to CNN or the Wall Street Journal, and all of those things are free. And that's a great way to practice because you can actually slow down the recording and listen to it a bit slower if you're a beginner and you need a little bit of extra time or practice when you're listening to these things.
Thank you. And my next question is about the most typical mistakes that non-native speakers do. And I already, I think, recognized one that I'm doing constantly because I'm not a native speaker. I'm Russian. And in the beginning or at the beginning, like always.
So it's funny you say that because actually the most common mistakes are the little things, right? Like articles and prepositions. So articles are the words a, an, and the, and prepositions are the words like in, at, by, with. These are really tricky for non-native speakers. But the good news is that even though these are really tricky and non-native speakers have difficulty with this, native speakers can almost always understand the meaning of what you're trying to say, even if you're making these small mistakes. So my biggest advice to people is not to stress about these really small words, okay? Actually, like your example, you can actually say in the beginning or at the beginning, depending on the context. Both of these are correct. And it's better for you as a non-native speaker, especially if you're in an interview or starting a new job, not to stress about these small things, not to get really nervous, not to beat yourself up, not to get shy and quiet, but just to keep talking, right? Try to force yourself to finish your sentence, finish your idea, and not worry so much about these small things. These small things are issues that take a long time to perfect, but they're not going to cause you big problems when you're in an interview or a job. Your big issue comes when you get stuck on these small details and then you get really stressed out and you start thinking too much about your English rather than answering the question or finishing the project or communicating with the colleague who's right in front of you. So don't stress about these small things. Don't try to correct yourself each and every place because even native speakers make mistakes sometimes, and that's okay. The bigger idea is being able to communicate your ideas effectively and clearly and not causing some sort of major misunderstanding. Okay, you can't call this black if it's white. Okay, that's the sort of thing that could really confuse people. But if you're saying in the beginning or at the beginning and you're not exactly sure which one is right, I wouldn't stress too much about that. It's more about the big idea.
Yeah, there's definitely no person who got refused a job because he made a small mistakes. At least we never heard these stories. So
Exactly.
I think we have some more questions about what we just said. Do you think mobile apps like Duolingo are effective for learning English? I think we already covered this.
Yeah, I want to address that quickly, though, just in a little bit more detail. I don't think just an app is enough to learn English. I think it's a good supplement to practicing your speaking with another person. I think you could spend 10 hours a day on these applications and maybe not make much progress, but I think they're great supplements to other forms of practice.
And we have another one from Ksenia. How do you handle the situation when your mind goes blank during an interview? That's a good one.
That's an excellent question. And that's something even native speakers have to deal with. I think it's more difficult for non-native speakers. But in these situations, again, it's about trying to stay calm, right? Not get too flustered and to buy yourself some time. You can always say something like, that's an excellent question. Let me think about that for a second. Or, wow, no one's ever asked me that. I need to think of a good example. Or you can simply say, I'm so sorry, my mind just went blank. Can you ask the question in another way? Or could you repeat that for me? All of these little phrases will buy you 5 or 10 seconds. And that's usually enough time to get your mind back on track and try to refocus. It's when we get nervous and we start thinking about being nervous that this becomes a bigger and bigger problem. So learning a couple of these phrases, memorizing them and keeping them handy should make you feel a little bit more comfortable and confident and can hopefully get you out of these situations if you end up getting a little bit nervous or going blank in an interview.
Yeah, I would also say preparation is a key. You just need to get ready to prepare your story bank, to predict the interview questions that you're going to be asked, and it would help you to avoid these kind of situations. And so let's talk about English language interviews and how do we prepare for them? How do we actually get ready for these kind of situations?
Yeah, so just as I would recommend you prepare in a different native language, there's lots of different things you can do. The first is to start by studying the job description and the company that you're applying for, right? You want to learn as much as possible about the company and what they're looking for in their candidates so that you have this information as you start to prepare for the interview. A lot of people wait until the day before to start researching the company or really dive into the requirements of the position. And I think that's a big mistake because as you're preparing your own stories and thinking about your experience that you've already had in your career, you want to always be thinking about how this can apply to this particular company and this particular position that you're applying for. So that's why throughout our boot camp, we talk a lot about preparing stories based on your career experience that showcase these skills that you know they're looking for. I think a lot of times we try to prepare for every single question that could possibly be asked, but it's more important to think of like maybe 5, 6, 7 stories that really tell about your experience throughout your career, and then apply those 6 or 7 stories to the different questions that you get. And by practicing these stories again and again, you can get really comfortable telling these stories in English and be able to answer different interview questions with the same story. So that's something we talk a lot and practice a lot in our boot camp so that people get really comfortable before they go into that interview and they have some confidence so they don't go blank and get nervous when they first start the interview.
And let's talk maybe more in details about interview questions. What are some of the most frequently asked questions in the interview?
Sure. So of course, this will depend on the industry and the job that you're applying for, but you can expect in any interview to be asked some form of the question, tell me about yourself, right? They might say, can you walk me through your career experience? Can you go into your resume in more detail? Any of these types of questions are simply trying to collect information as kind of an overview of who you are and where you've been in the past and where you want to go in the future. You also are always going to get questions about your greatest strengths or your biggest weaknesses. That might look slightly different. It might be what was your biggest accomplishment or what is your biggest failure? But it's always good to be prepared for those questions, as well as like, why do you want this particular job, right? Why do you want to work for this company? What motivates you? Why are you leaving your current job? How are you going to make an impact in the first 3 months in your new role? All of these questions are things that we talk about in the bootcamp. And I think these are questions you can expect whether you're in marketing, finance, or technology. Some form of these questions will always be asked. And I think it's always good to be prepared for those types of questions.
Yeah, and this question, tell me about yourself, sounds very simple, but it's actually not. And what we recognize that a lot of people are actually failing to answer the very first question, tell me about yourself, because it's very vague. And what do you need to tell actually? What do you need to say?
Yeah, this is tricky because this question is asked at every stage of the interview, right? Even if you have a 15-minute phone screening interview, they're probably going to ask this question. And even if you make it to the 3rd or 4th round, they might ask you this question again. So it's really important to prepare for this particular question because it kind of gets the ball rolling, right? If you answer this question well, it sets you up for success throughout the rest of the interview. So my advice when answering this question is to keep it simple, right? You don't want to go into lots of details about where you were born and how you grew up and what you like to do on the weekends. When they say, tell me about yourself, they mean, tell me about yourself professionally, right? Not as a whole person, but how did you get into what you're doing? What do you do now? What are some of your biggest accomplishments you've had in the past? And then also really importantly, what are you looking for in the future? And if you can match that last part very well to the position you're applying for, it can really show your interest and enthusiasm for the position and set up some good follow-up questions for you to answer. So I always tell people the best answers to this question are usually like 90 seconds. Between 1 and 2 minutes, right? If you talk for 4, 5, 6 minutes, you're probably giving a lot of irrelevant information that they don't need. And if you talk for less than a minute, you probably haven't provided enough information. So one of the things we spend some time on in the 5-week bootcamp is getting everyone comfortable answering this question because it's such a key question. And even if they don't say or ask the question exactly, tell me about yourself, you can always use this structure to answer a first or second question in an interview. So it's really important to prepare for that one.
And I think it's the last question before we talk a bit about bootcamp and then we take the questions from the audience. How do you do research before the interviews? Like just like maybe shortly, because I know it's very also very vast topic, but maybe like shortly, how do you research the company and what do you need to do before the interviews?
Yeah, well, so like I said before, the first key is not to wait until the last minute, right? You want to start your research as soon as you're interested in a position because you want to learn not just what's on the company website, but hopefully have a chance to talk to some people in the company or at least read some articles about the company before you go into the interview so you have some talking points. But yeah, certainly check out the company website, read their about page, search them on Google, check all of their social media, try to find any news or recent events that might apply to you or the position you're applying for, and get really comfortable talking about it. One way you can do that is to discuss it with your friends and family, right? Like people who you already know and people you're comfortable with. Tell them a little bit about the job that you're applying for, and maybe have them ask some questions about the company. And hopefully they ask you some interesting questions and give you some ideas on other things you can research before you go into the interview. But biggest advice is don't wait until the last minute. At least a few days in advance, start looking into the website, the social media, Googling them, and getting a good idea of what's going on inside the company, and particularly what's going on inside the company that could affect your role that you're applying for.
Okay, and for the last question, just what is exactly the Airteams Career Bootcamp, and what are the topics that we will be covering there?
Yeah, so this is actually our second round of our 5-week bootcamp, which is designed to help international professionals looking for jobs in English-speaking companies. So we cover everything that helps people get jobs. We talk about everything from building a great CV, to writing cover letters, to improving your LinkedIn page. We talk about how to reach out to companies, how to tell your personal stories, and of course, how to answer the most common and challenging interview questions. We also go into detail about specific questions related to different industries. So anybody joining our course, whether they're in marketing, finance, or technology, we spend some time deep diving into particular questions that you might get in those different industries. We also talk about salary negotiations and ways for you to get the best offer possible, because I know that's something that's really challenging for a lot of people and something we don't spend a lot of time on until we're put in a difficult situation where we get kind of a low offer and we were really hoping to get a little bit more money. So we talk about strategies for handling that. And I think the biggest difference between our bootcamp and other programs that you might find online is that we're very hands-on, right? I'm one of 2 instructors. We also have Christina Harris, who's an awesome recruiter who's worked for Adobe for many, many years. And we get really involved. We are very hands-on with your resume, with your cover letters. We provide a lot of feedback. As Alyssa mentioned, we do one-on-one English evaluations before the course starts to get an idea of where everyone is and give you some ideas on how you can improve your English throughout the 5 weeks. And I think, having really important topics that are very beneficial to actually getting you a job makes us a little bit different than other programs that are just kind of giving you lectures and lots of information, but not actually walking you through the process like our bootcamp will do with these important topics.
Yeah, I would also mention probably that both of our instructors are native speakers and they're from California, both Christina and Robert. And also one of the main feedback that we get from our students is that they actually managed to remove this language barrier, thankfully to the course, because it's a very intense practice of business English. So it's like you really speak a lot, you really like talk to native speakers, you talk to other students, and it really helps you to improve your speaking language. And if you're interested to see the website, I just sent the link. Our next cohort starts on May 16th, and we actually offering a 30% off to everyone who attended the webinar. So I'm just sending the promo code that you can use if you decide to join the bootcamp. And I think that's
we've got a couple other questions in the chat that we haven't had a chance to answer yet. I'm just kind of looking through. Olga asked, what kind of English is enough for a recruiter in an international company? So Olga, this is going to depend on exactly what you mean by recruiter, right? There's sourcers and recruiters. Sourcers are the people finding the ones who could potentially apply for jobs. You don't need a super high level of English for that. Usually a beginner level English is perfectly fine. If you're a recruiter, it depends on your level of responsibility. Some recruiters are going to be having to make phone calls and speak to candidates on the phone. So a higher level of English will be required. I would say B2+. And if it's somebody who's going to be working with native speakers, like based in the US, looking for US candidates, they might be looking for somebody with like C1 English or higher. So depends on the company, depends on the candidates you're going to be talking to, but you should never not apply for a job because you're worried about your English skills. It's always good to apply for the job and do the interviews, because that form of practice is going to help you advance quicker than almost anything else. So don't let those qualifications prevent you from applying. It's always worth trying.
We are done
Does
with the
anyone else have questions?
content. Yes. Yeah, we're open for the questions from the audience.
I think there was one other. Val had asked, is there any difference between the states? Maybe some states, for example, California, are hiring more actively if you're looking for a job as a product manager, game producer. Yeah, so not necessarily based on the state. Obviously, some states are bigger than others. California is the biggest state in the US. It's also kind of the technology hub of the US and some might say the world. So you're going to see a lot of opportunities there. But there are companies based throughout the US, and lots of companies are moving to Colorado and Texas from California because of the tax incentives there are slightly more helpful for both employees and for companies. So don't limit yourself to just searching for jobs in California or just in New York. I would open up your search and search nationwide, because you never know what you might find.
I also think competition is much higher in California because their pay rate is a bit higher than other states.
And it has to be, because it's much more expensive to live in California than most other states. So if anyone has spent time there, you'll notice it's quite a bit more expensive than places like Colorado, which are also beautiful and amazing places to live. So keep your mind open when applying for jobs. I know we often think about California as this wonderful place to live, but the US is a massive country and there are many wonderful places to live. Are there any other questions about the bootcamp, about how it works or how you can join us or what participating in the bootcamp might look like?
Guys, don't be shy. You can unmute yourself, or you can send us questions in the chat if you don't want to talk to us.
We've also
today.
got some extra time, so if anyone has questions about their specific job search or process that they're going through right now, I'd be happy to answer any of those questions if I can provide some help for you in the next few minutes also. I think another key differentiator for us is that we're really invested in this program, and we really want it to become kind of a community. We still have a group of people from our first cohort who regularly communicate and kind of send each other funny memes, but also send each other job opportunities and words of encouragement and advice when they're looking to improve their resume or looking for job opportunities. And we're really hoping we can create that same sort of environment with our second cohort as well. It's been really cool to kind of make some new friends and follow along with everyone's journey. Everyone's in a different place. Some people are really happy with the jobs they have now, and they're kind of thinking about applying for jobs in the future. Other people are like actively interviewing and sending out their resume, as we go through the course. So no matter where you are, I think the boot camp can be helpful for you.
If I want to join, can I pay in cryptocurrency? We can discuss it. Send us a message on Telegram, and yeah, we can make it work.
Yeah, Val, if you reach out to Airteam directly, I'm sure that we can arrange something and take care of that for you. We'd love to have as many people as possible, so we don't want currency issues to be a barrier for anybody.
Yeah, that's what we are actually trying. The big idea is to make hiring borderless. So we don't want people to be tied to the market or to the country where they live or where they were born. So we want hiring opportunities to be available for everyone. So yeah, that's not a problem at all.
And I've got a question. Oh, actually, Xenia has a question. What are the key differences between looking for a job in the American and European markets? Does the bootcamp focus solely on the American market? So there are some differences. I think one of the key things right from the beginning is your resume, right? It looks slightly different in Europe than in American markets. And we actually talk about both throughout the bootcamp. So the nice thing about our bootcamp is it's a small group of people. So if we know that there are people in the group focusing on the European market, we'll spend even more time discussing that. But that is one of the things we review very early on in the bootcamp is the differences between the two markets and the specifics, like how you make your resume for the European market versus the US market, and how you answer questions for each of those markets, because it is slightly different. And the interviews themselves are a little bit different in the European and American markets. But that's a great question. I've got one question for the group. If nobody has any other questions, I'd love to hear, and you can just write in the chat. Have any of you done interviews in English before? You can simply say yes or no. I'm just kind of curious to get an idea of how many people have actually tried that before. We've got a couple yeses, one no. Mostly yeses, it looks like. Okay. Another no. Interesting. Okay, so it looks like most of you have already tried English-speaking interviews. Of you that have tried English-speaking interviews before, have any of you received job offers with English-speaking companies? Okay, excellent. We've got 2 yeses, 1 no. Okay, interesting. Another no. Okay, excellent. It's just kind of interesting for us to understand who's interested in the course and why you might be joining us, but that's really interesting. I think even if you have interviewed in English in the past, or if you haven't, and whether you've been successful in the past or maybe not, I think there's definitely some value in this course for you. And as we mentioned before, we will be dividing the group. So if we have people of different English proficiencies, we'll be splitting them up to make sure that we're kind of catering to everybody and making sure that everybody finds value in the course. So definitely don't limit yourself if you have interviewed in English in the past, or if this will be your first time. It's a great chance to get some practice. It's a really good way to get rid of some of those nervous feelings and butterflies, and get a chance to really build your confidence before you interview again in the future. So if there's anybody who's nervous about their English or wants to speak to me privately before joining the course, please reach out to Alyssa and let her know. And we're happy to set up kind of an introductory call. Just chat quickly for 10 or 15 minutes to make sure that you feel comfortable and are confident about joining the course. We don't want there to be a language barrier for anybody. And we'd be happy to talk to you one-on-one if you have any questions. So just reach out to Alyssa and let us know if you'd like to set that up. Any other questions before we wrap up? I don't want to make it too long because I know we're going to have some people watching the recording, but if there's any last questions, I'd be happy to answer them before we go. Yes, please. I will share my LinkedIn profile here. I'd be happy to connect with all of you. That's probably a good idea for everybody. You can also connect with AirTeam on LinkedIn as well, and Alyssa, and we would be happy to answer any questions for you there as well. I've just put my LinkedIn in the chat here. So everybody, please take a second to click on that, connect with me. If nothing else, it's good to build your LinkedIn network and connect with as many people as possible. So, oh, sorry, I realized I just sent that to Olga. Let me send that to everybody. Okay, so now my LinkedIn is in the chat for everybody. I think we'll be able to tag it for people watching the video later on, Alyssa. And I'd be happy to connect with everybody on LinkedIn and answer any questions you have. You can send me directly via LinkedIn as well.
Okay, thank you, Robert.
Okay, thank you, everybody. We appreciate you being here. Hopefully you got a tip or two that will be helpful for you and learned a little bit about our boot camp. We'd be really excited to have you join us. And like I said, if you have any questions or you want to set up a quick one-on-one call before joining the boot camp, please feel free to reach out to us and set that up.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good day.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Bye.